Northwestern Wildcats are going to be an interesting program. I mean, for the most part, too, they're an under the radar program, all things considered. Definitely more of an academic school. They've only won 3 Big Ten championships since 1995. However, under Pat Fitzgerald, when he was there for almost 20 plus seasons, they were pretty consistently in bowl games, particularly between 2015 and 2020. They were essentially playing bowl games just about every single year. They rank well above the top 10, 15% of the country in terms of academic rates. And now they're kind of getting over the Pat Fitzgerald bump. They have David Braun as their head coach and their first full season under him. All things, and granted, he's inherited a tough position. You have them revamping Ryan Field, which by the time that all wraps up, should definitely see some more fans in the stadium there. You do have a couple games at Wrigley Field this year, and that's always good tourist attraction. Definitely brings a lot of eyes to the program as well. And I sit there and say to myself, they have a lot of good things going for them too. And now, especially with the Pat Fitzgerald settlement finally coming together, it seems like now that Northwestern can kind of really move things forward and not have that cloud overshadow them too much now. And as I look at this Northwestern team, there's definitely some positives on the recruiting front at least. They're 66th this year compared to 2024. They were 73rd, so they are moving some pieces there. They are having some success out of state with about 75% of their class coming from out of state too. So things are developing in the right way for them. And granted, there's always going to be some challenges, right? The first off, just being in a more expanded Big Ten now, you're competing with the USCs of the world. You're competing with UCLA. The divisions within the conference are essentially gone now. So on top of having all those extra teams now, you're also fighting all these other schools to keep all the players that you do have. And then you're chipping away little by little in terms of getting any recruits that you possibly can, on top of trying to add some guys in the transfer portal too. In terms of the transfer portal, I would say the biggest addition that they got was Preston Stone over at SMU. And I will say he definitely will end up being the starter for them more than likely. And for those of you who didn't watch much of Preston Stone last year, I think he's a kid that definitely has some potential. He's got a solid throwing arm, really athletic build, and quite frankly, if he didn't get hurt at the time that he did, it definitely would have been interesting to see what he could have done at SMU. And granted, SMU kind of ran with Kevin Jennings after they've had the success that they've had. So it gives Preston Stone a really good opportunity to kind of make a name of himself and also be playing some big time football too. And Northwestern's one of those programs where they get overlooked, quite frankly, all the time. And I go back and when I look at Northwestern, I think of that Duke game at the beginning of the year that was a complete barn burner. I go ahead and think about, just the overall consistency that they've had over the past couple of years. And, for the most part, I think things will figure themselves out, but it's going to take a little bit of time to really get that going all together. And, just for some other stats too that are worth kind of mentioning as we're talking about Northwestern, they're returning about 58% of their production from last season, 54% returning on offense, and 62% on defense. And for the most part, too, I think we can all agree that the bread and butter of Northwestern football has been on the defensive side of the football as well. That's always been one of the strengths of the program, and definitely one of the bigger reasons why we saw as much success as it did last year. I think a lot of people were expecting them to have maybe a 3 or a 4 win season. So to turn around and win 5 games, I mean, that's definitely something where, hey, you definitely were one of the more experienced teams last year. And now that you're kind of going into this season, not having as many pieces as you did last year, you're kind of rebuilding a little bit more on the recruiting front. And also the majority of your class are primarily 3-star guys. So there's a lot working against you in that regard. And it could be it could be a difficult year for them to really see some improvement. It could be one of those years where we all kind of sit there and say to ourselves, hey, there's nothing wrong with having a similar season as last year. Sometimes people think to themselves, oh, we won 5-7 2 times in a row. All of a sudden, that means we've plateaued. And that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of working parts to this. They are playing at a temporary field right now. It seems like Northwestern is really kind of putting some things together in order to get them more relevant within the Big Ten realm right now too. But I feel like Northwestern's kind of similar to Duke in the sense that at the end of the day, they are going to be an academic first school. At the end of the day, Northwestern may or may not have a football ceiling to a degree. I mean, we saw it with Pat Fitzgerald too, that for the most part too, I bet if you talk to Northwestern fans between that, 2012 to 2022 window where he was there, I don't think anybody was complaining about them going to bowl games every year and maybe not necessarily competing in the Big Ten all the time. I mean, the last time they won a division title was back in 2020, even though they didn't necessarily win the Big Ten. It still is important that those successes are highlighted too, because especially in this day and age of the playoff and all those things, people don't necessarily give credit to the little small things like that ultimately ended up making things relevant and reasonable and things that I think, quite frankly, you should be excited about if you're a Wildcat supporter. And now that I look at their schedule for the season, there's definitely going to be some big question marks. I mean, obviously, it's a relatively difficult schedule, in my opinion, mainly due to some of the traveling that you have. I mean, let's look down the line here. You're going to have to play at Nebraska. You're going to travel to USC, and also you have Illinois at the end of the year too. And I got to mention the one other fascinating thing about Northwestern schedule is this is the first time since 1928 that they don't play Iowa or Wisconsin too. And obviously that's a side effect to the expanded Big Ten, but it's also unfortunate too that these rivalries that we've been accustomed to seeing for almost a century now are going to be essentially gone. And I think we're going to see this more and more in college football, but it's so important for these teams like Northwestern, who don't have as much of a following, to be able to keep up with those successes, be able to keep up with those traditions as much as possible too. And I think Northwestern's got a tricky schedule. I'm not going to sit there and say they have one of the toughest schedules in the Big Ten, but I sit there and say to myself, you have to play all the big shots within the Big Ten. You do have to play Oregon, you do have to play Penn State, and you have to play Michigan. I mean, if you ask me three teams I wouldn't want to face in any season within the Big Ten, those are probably the three that I would give you. Now, granted, you do play Michigan at Wrigley Field, and that will definitely be nice in terms of buying tickets for it and everything. But I wouldn't be surprised if Michigan can even play an ounce of offense this season, that game could get ugly pretty quick. And as I look at the beginning of the schedule, Tulane is definitely one of the trickiest group of five programs in the entire country, just in the sense that they're definitely one of the best, if not the best. I mean, I sit there and say to myself, I think of Boise State, obviously. I think of Tulane. I think Texas State's definitely going to make some noise too. And overall, that's going to be a difficult game for them too. Especially, it's going to be a big statement to see how much will this offense improve compared to last year. I think a lot of times they had some issues with being disciplined on that front. They couldn't pass as much ideally as they could have. And just a lot of the times that I saw was relatively stagnant. And it seems like that they're going to, try some different things out. They got some new weapons in there. They added a couple of receivers in the transfer portal as well. So it could be fascinating to see kind of how that evolves over time too. But obviously, Western Illinois is just a little bit of a tune-up game for them. They're one of the worst teams in all of the FCS. Oregon could be an ugly game. I think UCLA, that game on the 27th, is going to be a must-win, especially with them now having Nico too. So you could probably argue that they're going to be an underdog in that game. But they're going to have to steal a couple of these games if they really want to keep with that 5-7, 6-6 trajectory that I think a lot of people are more than likely going to give them too. And then as I look down the line, you have Louisiana Monroe, who was way better than anybody expected last year. So that could be another tricky game for them. And then you have Penn State. I talked about Purdue. That could be a game that you can steal. USC, Minnesota, and Illinois. So as I look at the schedule, it's definitely not the easiest that I've seen. It's definitely going to be some bumps in the road. As I mentioned before, they've only won 10 Big Ten championships, or sorry, 3 Big Ten championships since 1995, consistently bowl eligible. But they're still going to be working through some things. And as college football becomes more and more top heavy, and you see these schedules get increasingly more difficult for the Northwesterns of the world, for the Purdues of the world, the more that we're going to see this gap between the competitiveness of a lot of these Power Four programs. And unfortunately, I think there is going to be some tough sledding here, especially with the amount of productivity is definitely not where it wants to be. They definitely lost some kids in the transfer portal. They did their best by adding a handful of 3-star recruits, but I got to imagine that this is going to be a tough season for him. It seems like David Braun is the right guy that's going to be leading this program. Fortunately, they've been remarkably patient with the number of head coaches that they've had, and ultimately, with the revamp of Ryan Field and some of the facilities as well, I definitely think that they are making a genuine intention on making the program better.